Daddy is lying. The words cut through the courtroom like a knife. The judge's gavel froze midair. The lawyers turned their heads sharply. The jury gasped. Every eye in the room swung toward the tiny voice that had just shattered the tension. A little girl, no older than 9, stood in the middle of the aisle. Her blue eyes were wide, her small hands clenched into fists. Her pink dress, once neat and pressed, was now crumpled as if she had been fidgeting for hours. The judge, a stern-looking man with gray hair, peered over his glasses. "Excuse me." His voice was measured, confused. But the girl wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the man sitting at the witness stand, her father. He was a tall man in a navy blue suit, his dark hair slicked back. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His face had turned pale. "Daddy is lying," the girl repeated, louder this time, her voice trembling but firm. "And I can prove it." A murmur spread across the courtroom like wildfire. The opposing lawyer immediately stood up. "Your Honor, I." The judge raised a hand, silencing the room. He leaned forward, studying the girl. "Young lady, what do you mean?" The girl took a deep breath. "He's lying about what happened that night," she said. "He wasn't where he said he was." "I know because—" She hesitated, her lip quivering. "Because what?" The judge pressed, his voice gentle but firm. The little girl's eyes filled with tears. "Because I saw something. And if I tell you, you won't believe it." Silence. Heavy, thick silence. Everyone was staring, waiting. The courtroom was frozen in time. The little girl gulped. And then, she said something that made everyone's blood run cold. 2 months earlier. The world was normal then. Or at least, it seemed that way. It was a chilly autumn morning when Olivia Brooks, a bright-eyed 9-year-old, hurried down the stairs of her home, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. Her golden curls were tied into a ponytail, and she had a peanut butter sandwich stuffed in her mouth. "Slow down, Liv," her mom, Sarah, called from the kitchen, laughing as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. "You'll choke." Olivia giggled, swallowing. "I don't want to be late. Today's the field trip to the animal shelter." Her dad, Jason Brooks, entered the room, adjusting his tie. He was always busy, always rushing to work, always on the phone. But today, he actually looked at Olivia and smiled. "Excited about the animals, huh?" She nodded eagerly. "Uh-huh. I want to see the puppies." Jason chuckled. "You and your animals." He kissed the top of her head, then grabbed his briefcase. "I have a big day today, too," he said. "Wish me luck." "Good luck, Daddy." Olivia grinned. But if she had known what was coming, if she had known what she would soon discover, she never would have smiled that morning. The day started like any other. Olivia's class visited the shelter, where she played with the puppies, cuddled the kittens, and listened to the workers talk about kindness to animals. "They don't have voices like we do," the woman at the shelter said. "So it's our job to stand up for them when something isn't right." Olivia nodded seriously. She liked that idea, standing up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. She didn't know it yet, but soon, she would have to do exactly that. Later that night, Olivia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Her parents had been arguing earlier, whispered words behind closed doors. She hadn't understood much, just a few phrases. "I don't want to do this anymore, Jason." "We don't have a choice, Sarah." Then, silence. Olivia frowned. She hated it when her parents fought. She rolled onto her side and pulled her blanket up to her chin. It would be okay in the morning. It always was. But it wasn't. The next day, something strange happened. Her father didn't come home that night. And when he did the next morning, he looked different. His suit was wrinkled. His hands were shaking. And his eyes, those warm, familiar eyes, were filled with something Olivia didn't recognize. Fear. Her mom was crying. And then, everything changed. That was the moment Olivia realized that sometimes grown-ups kept secrets. Big ones. Dangerous ones. And she was about to uncover one that would change her family forever. But she had no idea that secret would lead her to a courtroom, standing in front of a judge, yelling, "Daddy is lying." The courtroom was still frozen in shock. Olivia stood in the center, her tiny frame trembling, but her voice was strong. Her father, Jason Brooks, sat at the witness stand, his face pale. His hands were clenched together so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Olivia," his voice cracked as he spoke. "Sweetheart, what are you doing?" The judge looked from Olivia to Jason, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Brooks, do you know what your daughter is referring to?" Jason opened his mouth, but no words came out. He glanced at his lawyer, who looked just as stunned as the rest of the courtroom. "I know what I saw," Olivia continued, her voice firm, her small fists shaking at her sides. "And I know Daddy is lying." The air in the room was thick, suffocating. The judge leaned forward. "What did you see?" Olivia swallowed hard. She looked at her father. Tears welled up in her eyes. And then, she whispered something so shocking that the entire room gasped. 2 months earlier, after that strange night, when Jason came home late, Olivia started noticing things. Her dad was always careful. He never left his work papers lying around. He never talked about his job at home. But something was different now. He was distracted, jumpy, and the whispers between her parents didn't stop. One night, Olivia tiptoed downstairs for a glass of water. As she passed the kitchen, she heard her mother's voice, low, urgent. "This isn't right, Jason. We need to go to the police." Her father's reply was sharp. "No, Sarah, you don't understand. If we talk, we're all in danger." Olivia's stomach twisted. Danger? She clutched her glass tighter. What could be so bad that her parents were afraid? That weekend, things only got stranger. Her father had a rule: no one was allowed in his office. But that Saturday morning, Olivia saw something she wasn't supposed to see. The door to his office was cracked open. She peeked inside. Her dad was at his desk, typing furiously. Papers were scattered everywhere. His phone was on speaker, and a deep voice rumbled from the other end. "If anyone finds out, it's over for you, Brooks. You understand?" Jason ran a hand through his hair. "I understand." The phone clicked off. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. Who was that? What did they mean by "it's over for you"? She backed away from the door just as her dad turned. Their eyes met. For the first time in her life, she saw something terrifying in his face. Not anger. Not frustration. Fear. "Olivia," he said slowly, standing up. "What are you doing here?" She hesitated. I was looking for Mom." Jason studied her. Then he knelt down in front of her, gripping her shoulders. "Sweetheart, listen to me." His voice was soft but serious. "You can't ever come in here, okay? No matter what." Her throat went dry. "Why?" He forced a smile. "Because Daddy's work is very important. It's complicated. It's better if you don't get involved." Olivia nodded, but inside, she knew. Her dad was hiding something. And it was big. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. Her dad's words kept repeating in her head. "You can't ever come in here. No matter what." Why? What was so secret that she couldn't even know about it? She needed to find out. So the next night, when her parents were asleep, Olivia made her move. She crept down the hallway, her heart thumping. The house was dark, except for the glow coming from under her dad's office door. He must have forgotten to turn off the light. She pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. She took a deep breath and turned the knob. The door opened, and what she saw inside made her blood run cold. The courtroom was completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. "Olivia," the judge said slowly, "what did you see?" The little girl clenched her fists. Her lips trembled. And then, she finally spoke. "I saw something in Daddy's office that night. And it changes everything." A stunned murmur spread through the crowd. Jason's lawyer immediately stood up. "Your Honor, I object. This child..." But the judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Let her speak." Jason looked like he was about to collapse. His eyes were pleading. "Olivia, sweetheart, please." "I saw what you were hiding, Daddy," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "I saw everything." The courtroom erupted into chaos. The truth was finally about to come out. The courtroom was in uproar. The murmurs turned into full-blown whispers. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order. Order in the court." But Olivia wasn't paying attention to any of it. Her hands were shaking, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Her father, Jason Brooks, looked like he wanted to disappear. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgently, but Jason wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on Olivia, wide, desperate, pleading. "Olivia," he whispered, shaking his head slightly. "Please, sweetheart, don't." Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes, but she didn't back down. She took a deep breath. And then, she said the words that made the entire room gasp. "I saw what Daddy had hidden in his office that night," Olivia said. "And it proves he's lying." Silence. Everyone was staring, waiting. Jason swallowed hard. His hands were gripping the arms of his chair so tightly that his fingers turned white. The judge leaned forward. "Olivia, this is very serious. What exactly did you see?" The little girl hesitated. She could still picture it so clearly. The way the light from the office lamp had cast eerie shadows across the walls. The way the papers were scattered across the desk, as if her dad had been frantically searching for something. And then, the thing that changed everything. Olivia closed her eyes for a second, then looked straight at the judge. "I saw a briefcase," she said. "A black briefcase hidden under my dad's desk." The room held its breath. Jason's face drained of all color. "I didn't know what was inside," Olivia continued. "But Daddy looked really scared, like he didn't want anyone to find it." Jason's lawyer shot up from his seat. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a child's imagination. There is no proof of any briefcase." But Olivia wasn't done. She wiped a tear from her cheek and turned to look at her father. "But I couldn't stop thinking about it. So the next day, when no one was home," she took a shaky breath. "I went back, and I opened it." Gasps filled the courtroom. Jason's head snapped up. "Olivia, no." But it was too late. The words were already out. And now, everyone wanted to know, what was inside that briefcase? 2 months earlier, the night Olivia first saw the briefcase, she barely slept. She tossed and turned, her mind racing. What was inside it? Why did her dad look so scared? By morning, she had made up her mind. She had to know the truth. So she waited. She waited for her dad to leave for work. She waited for her mom to be distracted. And when the house was finally empty, she tiptoed down the hallway to her dad's office. The door was unlocked. Her hands trembled as she turned the knob and stepped inside. The room was cold, like a secret had been trapped inside for too long. Papers were still scattered across the desk, just like the night before. But Olivia wasn't looking at the desk. She was looking under it. There it was. The black briefcase. She crouched down, her heart pounding as she reached for it. The leather felt smooth under her fingertips, but the metal lock was ice cold. She hesitated. Should she do this? Her dad had told her not to go into his office. He had looked so serious. But then she remembered the phone call. The way her dad had sounded scared. The way her mom had said, "We need to go to the police." Whatever was in this briefcase, it wasn't just work. Olivia took a deep breath and clicked the lock open. The lid lifted with a soft snap. And inside, her blood ran cold. This wasn't what she expected. Not even close. Back in the courtroom, Olivia's voice trembled. "I saw papers," she whispered. "Lots of them. And they weren't normal papers." Jason's breathing was ragged. "Olivia, please." But she kept going. They had names on them. Addresses. Numbers. Her hands clenched into fists. And there was money. A lot of money. Bundles of it. The judge's expression darkened. "What kind of papers, Olivia?" She gulped. "I don't know exactly. But they looked official. Some of them had big stamps on them. Some looked like contracts." A chill ran through the courtroom. Jason's lawyer had gone completely still. The judge's eyes flicked to Jason. "Mr. Brooks, what exactly was in that briefcase?" Jason didn't answer. His jaw was tight, his hands gripping the chair so hard it looked painful. But Olivia wasn't done yet. "There was something else," she said softly. "Something that scared me." Everyone leaned in. "I found a phone." Jason's head snapped up. His whole body stiffened. Olivia's lip trembled. It was hidden under the papers. And when I pressed the button, she took a shaky breath. There were messages. Jason stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled over. "That's enough." His voice was sharp. "This has gone far enough." The judge's gavel slammed. "Sit down, Mr. Brooks." Jason hesitated, his hands clenching, but he obeyed. His eyes burned with something unreadable as he looked at his daughter. But Olivia didn't stop. She turned back to the judge. The messages, they were from someone named R. Her voice was barely a whisper. And they said things like, "Everything is in place, and no mistakes, or we're all finished." A shudder went through the room. And then she said the words that shattered everything. One of the messages said, "Make sure no one finds out what happened that night." The courtroom erupted. Lawyers were shouting. The judge was banging his gavel. Jason's face was frozen in horror. And Olivia? She realized, in that moment, that she had just uncovered something much bigger than she had ever imagined. And her father wasn't just lying. He was hiding something dangerous, something that could change everything. Chaos exploded in the courtroom. Lawyers were shouting over each other. The judge's gavel banged repeatedly, and the murmurs from the jury grew louder. Some gasped, some exchanged glances, and others simply stared in shock at the little girl who had just turned the entire case upside down. But Olivia? She just stood there. Her tiny hands were shaking, but she didn't take her eyes off her father. Jason Brooks was no longer a confident businessman sitting on the witness stand. He looked broken. His skin had gone pale, his eyes hollow with fear. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Olivia's mother, Sarah, had her hand over her mouth, her face frozen in horror. The judge finally managed to restore order. "Enough," he boomed. "This courtroom will remain silent." The voices died down. The judge turned back to Olivia. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't even impatient. It was something far worse. Concern. "Olivia," he said, his voice softer now, "are you telling this court that your father was involved in something that night? That the message you read suggested that something happened, something that had to be covered up?" She swallowed hard. "Yes." Another gasp rippled through the crowd. Jason shot up from his seat. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. She's just a child. She doesn't understand what she's saying." But before the judge could respond, Olivia spoke again. "I do understand," she said, louder this time. "I understand that you were scared, Daddy. And I understand that you were hiding something. But I don't understand why." Her voice cracked on the last word. Jason's face fell. The judge turned to him. "Mr. Brooks, I will ask you one more time. What exactly was in that briefcase?" Jason hesitated. He looked at his lawyer, whose face was now twisted with frustration and worry. He looked at his wife, whose eyes were brimming with unshed tears. And then he looked at Olivia, his little girl, the daughter he had tried so hard to protect. For a moment, everything was still. And then Jason did something no one expected. He sighed and sat back down, defeated. "Your Honor," his lawyer said quickly, "my client refuses to answer any further questions." A stunned silence followed. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Brooks, you are under oath. If you refuse to answer, the jury will have no choice but to draw its own conclusions." Jason rubbed a hand down his face. He looked exhausted. "I know," he murmured. Olivia's chest tightened. Why wasn't he fighting back? Why wasn't he trying to explain? Unless there was no explanation that could save him. Her heart clenched. "Daddy," she whispered, barely audible. Jason's gaze lifted to hers. And for the first time in her life, Olivia saw something she never thought she would see in her father. Guilt. 2 months earlier, the phone slipped from Olivia's hands. It clattered onto the desk, but she barely noticed. Her mind was spinning. Her stomach twisted. The messages, they weren't just about business. They were about something else. Something bigger. Something dangerous. "No mistakes, or we're all finished. Make sure no one finds out what happened that night." What happened? What was her father involved in? Olivia's breath was shaky as she picked up the phone again, her fingers fumbling to open more messages. But before she could, she heard something that made her entire body freeze. The front door. Opening. Her dad was home. Panic surged through her. She shoved the phone back into the briefcase, slammed the lid shut, and shoved it back under the desk. She barely had time to scramble away before she heard his footsteps approaching. She darted behind the couch just as he entered the room. Jason Brooks walked straight to his desk, running a hand through his hair. He looked tense. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw tight. He let out a slow breath before reaching under his desk for the briefcase. Olivia held her breath, her heart hammering in her chest. Jason pulled the case onto the desk, unlatched it, and pulled out the phone. His hands were shaking as he scrolled through the messages. His face darkened. Then, he did something that made Olivia's blood run cold. He deleted them. Every single one. One by one, he wiped them away, erasing the evidence. Olivia clapped a hand over her mouth, afraid to even breathe. Her father wasn't just hiding something. He was destroying it. Jason put the phone back in the briefcase and locked it shut. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He looked like a man with a heavy weight on his shoulders, like a man who had done something terrible. And Olivia knew, in that moment, that whatever her father was involved in, it wasn't just business. It was a secret, a dangerous one, and now she was a part of it. Back in the courtroom, Olivia's hands balled into fists. She knew what she had seen. She knew what she had read. And she knew, deep down, that her father was guilty of something. But the question was, what? The judge finally spoke, his voice grave. "Mr. Brooks, based on your refusal to answer, and based on your daughter's testimony, I am ordering an immediate investigation into your financial records and personal dealings." Jason's lawyer slammed his hands on the table. "Your Honor, this is outrageous." But the judge ignored him. "Furthermore, I am requesting a search warrant for Mr. Brooks's office and home. If there is anything to be found, we will find it." Olivia felt her stomach drop. This was really happening. The walls were closing in on her father. She turned to him, hoping, praying, he would finally speak. That he would tell the truth. That he would explain why he was doing all of this. But Jason Brooks just sat there, silent. His shoulders slumped. His head bowed. And Olivia realized something terrible. Her father had already accepted his fate. The courtroom was thick with tension. Jason Brooks sat slumped in his chair, his face pale, his fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly they turned white. His lawyer whispered furiously in his ear, but he didn't respond. Across the room, Olivia watched her father, her chest aching. Why wasn't he fighting back? Why wasn't he trying to explain? If there was nothing to hide, why was he acting like a man who had already lost? The judge's voice cut through the silence. "This court will reconvene after an official investigation is conducted," he announced. "Until then, Mr. Brooks is not to leave town." Jason barely reacted. The sound of the gavel echoed in Olivia's ears. The trial was over, for now. But her father's secrets were about to be uncovered. And Olivia had no idea just how deep they really went. 2 months earlier, after that night, everything changed. Olivia tried to go back to normal. She went to school, did her homework, played with her friends. She laughed with her mom and helped with dinner. But the weight of the briefcase never left her mind. The messages, the money, the fear in her father's eyes. She knew she should tell someone. Maybe her mom, maybe the police. But she couldn't, because as much as she wanted the truth, she didn't want to lose her dad. So she waited and watched. And that's when she noticed something strange. Her father was being followed. At first, she thought she was imagining it. But then it kept happening. A black car parked outside their house late at night. A man standing across the street, pretending to read a newspaper, but glancing toward their home every few minutes. Her father looking over his shoulder constantly, checking the locks twice before going to bed. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And Olivia was running out of time to figure out what. Back in the courtroom, Jason stood up slowly, his shoulders slumped. His lawyer patted his back, but Jason barely reacted. The trial was paused, but that didn't mean he was safe. Investigators would dig into his past. And if Olivia was right, they would find something. Something big. Sarah, Olivia's mother, rushed forward, her face tight with worry. "Jason," she whispered, "tell me what's going on. What have you done?" Jason didn't answer. He just looked at Olivia. And for the first time since this all started, Olivia saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Not anger, not fear, but sadness. A deep, heartbreaking sadness. Like a man who knew he was about to lose everything. Olivia's chest tightened. She had wanted the truth. But what if the truth destroyed their family? Her father turned to leave, escorted by his lawyer. But just as he reached the door, a man in a dark suit stepped inside. The room fell silent. The man held up a badge. "Jason Brooks," he said, his voice firm. "You're under arrest." Gasps filled the courtroom. Jason froze. Sarah clutched Olivia's hand, her face drained of all color. The judge's eyes widened. On what charges? The agent's face was unreadable. Fraud. Embezzlement. He hesitated. And conspiracy. A heavy silence filled the air. Olivia's stomach twisted. Conspiracy. That meant this wasn't just about money. This was about something bigger. Something dangerous. Jason slowly raised his hands, letting the agents cuff him. As they led him away, he turned one last time, his eyes locking onto Olivia's. And then he said the last thing she ever expected to hear. "I did it for you." Her breath caught in her throat. What did that mean? What had he done? And why was it for her? As the doors slammed shut behind him, Olivia realized. She had only uncovered part of the truth. The real story was just beginning. The courtroom was silent. The doors had just slammed shut behind Jason Brooks, but the echoes of his final words still rang in Olivia's ears. "I did it for you." She stood frozen, her small hands trembling at her sides. The man who had tucked her into bed, who had made her pancakes on Saturday mornings, who had carried her on his shoulders at the park, he was now in handcuffs. She should have felt relief. She should have felt justice. Instead, all she felt was confusion. Her mother, Sarah, stood beside her, gripping Olivia's shoulders tightly. "What does that mean?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "What did he do for you, Olivia?" Olivia didn't know, and that terrified her. The federal agent who had arrested Jason walked up to them. He was tall, with sharp blue eyes and a firm expression. He crouched down slightly to meet Olivia's gaze. "You're very brave," he said gently. "But I need you to tell me something. Did your father ever talk to you about what he was involved in?" Olivia swallowed hard. "No." The agent studied her for a long moment. "Then how did you know?" She hesitated. I found the briefcase," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I read the messages." The agent's eyes darkened. He turned to one of the officers. "We need to get into that office. Now." Sarah clutched Olivia closer. "What's going on?" she demanded. "What did my husband do?" The agent's gaze flicked to her, then back to Olivia. "We're about to find out." 2 months earlier, the days after Olivia discovered the briefcase were the longest of her life. Her father was acting stranger by the day. He barely spoke at dinner, barely smiled. He was always on edge, always checking his phone. And the black car? It was still there, always parked on the street, always watching. One night, Olivia was in bed when she heard voices downstairs. Angry voices. Her parents were arguing again. She crept to the top of the stairs and peeked down. Her dad stood near the kitchen table, his hands clenched into fists. Her mom was facing him, her eyes red and filled with anger. "You're scaring her, Jason." Sarah snapped. "You're scaring me. What have you gotten yourself into?" Jason ran a hand down his face. "I can't tell you." "You won't tell me." Sarah shot back. "Do you even hear yourself? You're hiding money, deleting messages, jumping at every sound outside. Do you even trust me anymore?" Jason's voice broke. "This isn't about trust." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Then what is it about?" Jason hesitated. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward the stairs, right where Olivia was hiding. Her heart stopped. Did he know she was there? His voice was softer now. "It's about keeping her safe." Sarah's expression crumpled. "What have you done?" she whispered. Jason looked down, his face full of regret. "What I had to." Olivia's stomach twisted. Her dad wasn't just hiding something. He was protecting something. And she was starting to realize that something was her. Back in the present, Olivia and her mother sat in their living room, waiting. The house felt cold, empty. The presence of her father, once so strong, was gone. And in its place was a sinking feeling of uncertainty. The front door opened. The federal agent stepped inside. Sarah stood immediately. "Did you find anything?" she demanded. The agent nodded. "We did." Olivia's stomach dropped. He placed a folder on the coffee table. Jason Brooks was laundering money. "We found transactions linking him to offshore accounts, falsified business deals, and large cash withdrawals with no recorded purpose." Sarah pressed a hand to her forehead. "Oh my God, but that's not the worst of it," the agent continued. Olivia's hands clenched. The agent flipped open the folder, revealing a picture of a man Olivia had never seen before. He was older, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and a hard expression. "Who was that?" Sarah asked. The agent's jaw tightened. "Richard Caldwell, the man your husband was working for." Olivia felt like she couldn't breathe. "Working for?" Sarah echoed. "You mean Jason wasn't the one in charge?" The agent shook his head. "No. He was involved, yes. But he wasn't the mastermind. Caldwell is a dangerous man, one of the biggest financial criminals we've been tracking for years. He runs an operation where high-level businessmen launder money for illegal activity. Your husband was one of them." Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her face pale. Olivia felt frozen. So Daddy was scared of him?" she whispered. The agent nodded. "Yes, and for good reason. The men who work for Caldwell don't just quit." A heavy silence filled the room. Sarah looked up, eyes glassy. "But why did Jason say he did it for Olivia?" The agent sighed. "That's the part we don't know yet. But if your husband was involved with Caldwell, that means he had access to something valuable, something Caldwell didn't want anyone to find." He looked at Olivia. "And that might be why he was watching your family." Olivia's heart pounded. The black car. The man across the street. They weren't just watching her dad. They were watching her. Sarah's voice shook. "Are we in danger?" The agent hesitated. "We need to move you somewhere safe." Sarah gasped. "What?" "Until we know exactly what Caldwell wants, you and Olivia can't stay here. He's lost his best employee. He might come looking for answers." Olivia gripped the edge of the couch. Her father was gone. Their home wasn't safe. And now, they were being hunted by a man they had never even met. She had wanted the truth, but she never expected it to cost her everything. Olivia's world was falling apart. The living room, once warm and filled with laughter, now felt like a prison. The agent's words echoed in her head. We need to move you somewhere safe. Safe. That meant she wasn't safe now. Sarah's voice was shaky. Where would we go? We have a protected location for cases like this, the agent said. Somewhere off-grid, where Caldwell's men won't find you. Sarah's face was pale. You think he's really coming for us? The agent hesitated. We don't take chances with men like Caldwell. Olivia's hands clenched. This was her fault. She had been the one to dig into her father's secrets. She had been the one to speak up in court. But now, her family was paying the price. Sarah took a deep breath and turned to Olivia. Go upstairs and pack a bag, sweetheart. Olivia nodded silently. She moved like a ghost, her feet barely making a sound on the stairs. Her room, her safe place, now felt unfamiliar. She grabbed her backpack, stuffing it with whatever she could. Clothes, her favorite book, her stuffed bear, the photo of her and her dad at the zoo last summer. Her hands trembled as she zipped it up. She had no idea when she'd see this room again, if ever. An hour later, they were on the road. A black SUV, driven by another agent, sped through the city streets. Sarah sat in the front, her fingers gripping the seatbelt tightly. Olivia was in the back, staring out the window. Everything looked normal. People walked their dogs. Kids rode their bikes. But to Olivia, nothing felt normal anymore. Her dad was in jail. A dangerous man was after them. And now, they were running. She hugged her backpack tighter. Where are we going? She finally asked. The agent in the driver's seat didn't look away from the road. A safe house, a few hours from here. No phones, no internet. No one will know where you are. Olivia's stomach twisted. No phones. Which meant no way to talk to her dad. Even after everything, the thought of leaving him behind hurt. She looked at her mom. Are we ever coming back home? Sarah turned, forcing a small smile. But Olivia saw the truth in her eyes. She didn't know. By the time they arrived, it was past midnight. The safe house was deep in the woods. No streetlights. No neighbors. Just trees and silence. It wasn't home. But at least it wasn't a jail cell. The agent walked them inside. You'll be safe here, he said. We have people watching the area. No one will get through. Sarah nodded, her grip still tight on Olivia's hand. Olivia glanced around the cabin. It was small but cozy, a couch, a tiny kitchen, 2 bedrooms. The windows had thick curtains, and there were no pictures on the walls. No signs of life. She sank onto the couch, exhaustion washing over her. The agent handed Sarah a phone. This is a secure line. If anything happens, call me. Sarah took it, her face unreadable. Try to get some sleep, the agent said before stepping out. The door locked behind him. For the first time in hours, they were alone. Sarah sighed, sitting beside Olivia. I know this is scary, she murmured. But we're going to be okay. Olivia wanted to believe her. But deep down, she had a terrible feeling. This wasn't over. Not even close. 2 weeks later, the safe house was quiet. Too quiet. Every day felt the same. Olivia woke up, ate breakfast, read books, tried to pretend everything was normal. But it wasn't. She missed school. She missed her friends. She missed her dad. Sarah tried to distract her, but Olivia could see the worry in her eyes. Every time the phone rang, Sarah jumped. Every time a car passed outside, she tensed. They were waiting for something. Or someone. And then, one night, he came. It was past midnight when Olivia woke up. At first, she didn't know why. Then she heard it. A soft click. Like a door unlocking. Her heart pounded. She sat up in bed, straining to hear. The cabin was dark, the only light coming from the moon outside. Then, footsteps. Slow. Careful. Inside the house. Olivia's breath caught. Someone was here. She slipped out of bed, her hands shaking. She tiptoed to the door and cracked it open just a little. And what she saw made her blood run cold. A tall figure stood in the living room, dressed in black. His back was turned, but she could see the outline of a gun at his side. Her entire body locked in terror. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then he turned, and Olivia saw his face. Her stomach dropped. She knew this man. She had seen his picture in the folder. Richard Caldwell. The man her father had been working for. The man who wanted them dead. He was here, in their house, and he was looking for her. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Richard Caldwell was standing in the living room, his tall frame barely illuminated by the moonlight seeping through the curtains. His sharp features were exactly as they had been in the photograph. The hard eyes, the graying hair, the cold expression. But now, He wasn't just a picture in a file. He was here, in their house, and he was looking for her. Olivia's entire body froze. She wanted to scream, to run to her mother's room, but she knew she couldn't make a sound. Caldwell moved slowly, his head tilting as he surveyed the room. He wasn't in a hurry. He was calm, like he knew they had nowhere to run. He took another step forward, then another. Olivia's heart pounded so loudly she was afraid he could hear it. Then, the floor creaked. Not from him, from behind her. She spun around just in time to see her mother stepping out of her bedroom, her eyes widening in horror. Caldwell turned his head, and then everything happened at once. Sarah lunged forward, grabbing Olivia and shoving her behind her body. "Who are you?" Sarah's voice was sharp, but Olivia could hear the fear beneath it. Caldwell smiled. "As if you don't already know," he said coolly. Sarah's hands tightened into fists. "You need to leave. Now." Caldwell chuckled, taking another step forward. "I don't think so." Olivia's stomach twisted. The way he spoke, the way he moved. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to end this. Sarah must have realized it too, because she suddenly grabbed Olivia's arm and yanked her backward, toward the hallway. Caldwell's expression darkened. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he murmured. Sarah ignored him, pulling Olivia toward the back door. Then, bang! The sound of a gunshot shattered the silence. Olivia screamed. Sarah froze. Caldwell hadn't shot at them, but he had shot near them. A warning. The bullet had lodged itself into the wooden floor, just inches away. "Mom!" Olivia whimpered, her entire body shaking. Caldwell lowered the gun slightly, his expression unreadable. "You have something I need," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I suggest you give it to me." Sarah's breath was heavy. "We don't have anything." Caldwell sighed, shaking his head. "Now that's a lie." He took another step forward. "Where is it?" Sarah's grip on Olivia tightened. "Where is what?" Caldwell's lips curled. "The file." Olivia's stomach dropped. "What file?" Sarah hesitated. That was all Caldwell needed. In an instant, he raised the gun again. Then, crash. The front door burst open. "FBI. Hands up." The room exploded into chaos. Caldwell whipped around just as agents swarmed into the house. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The sound of shouting filled the air. Sarah grabbed Olivia and yanked her to the ground just as another shot rang out. For a split second, Olivia thought Caldwell had fired again. But then she saw him collapse to the floor. The gun clattered from his hand. The agents rushed forward, pinning him down, their voices sharp and commanding. "Richard Caldwell, you're under arrest." Olivia barely heard them. She was shaking too hard. Sarah wrapped her arms around her, holding her close. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's over." But as Olivia looked at Caldwell, his cold, calculating expression never faltering even as they dragged him away, she realized something. It wasn't over. Not yet. 1 hour later, the safe house was a wreck. Bullet holes in the floor. A broken window. The flashing lights of FBI cars outside. Sarah sat on the couch, still holding Olivia close. Agents moved around them, speaking in hushed voices, gathering evidence. Then, the lead agent, the same one who had arrested Olivia's dad, walked up to them. "Are you both okay?" Sarah nodded weakly. "I think so." The agent sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You're lucky we got here when we did." Olivia swallowed hard. How did you know?" The agent sat down across from them. His expression was serious. "Your father." Olivia blinked. "What?" The agent leaned forward. "Jason Brooks made a deal. He told us everything he knew about Caldwell's operation, on one condition." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Sarah's eyes widened. "What condition?" The agent's expression softened. "He wanted to make sure we got to you in time." Silence. Olivia's chest tightened. Jason had warned them. Even from behind bars, he had protected them. Her father wasn't perfect. He had made mistakes. But in the end, he had done one thing right. He had saved them. Sarah covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Olivia grabbed her hand, squeezing it tightly. The agent stood. "Caldwell is finished. He won't be able to hurt you anymore." Olivia wanted to believe him, but she still had one question. "The file," she said hesitantly. Caldwell was looking for a file. What was in it? The agent hesitated. Then, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single folder. "This," he said, "is what your father gave us." Sarah took it carefully. She flipped it open, her eyes scanning the pages. Then suddenly, she gasped. Olivia peeked over her shoulder. The file was filled with names, numbers, transactions, but one name stood out. Hers. Olivia's hands shook. Why is my name in there? The agent sighed. That's the real reason Caldwell wanted you. Olivia's stomach twisted. Caldwell hadn't just been after her father. He had been after her. And now, she needed to find out why. Olivia stared at the folder, her heart pounding. Her name, right there, printed in black ink, among numbers and names she didn't recognize. She felt her mother's grip tighten on her hand. Sarah's face had gone pale, her fingers trembling as she turned the pages. The lead agent, who had just handed them the file, sighed. This is what Jason Brooks was trying to protect you from. Sarah swallowed hard. But why? She demanded. Why is Olivia's name in here? The agent hesitated, then leaned forward. Because Richard Caldwell wasn't just after your husband, he said carefully. He was after her. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Olivia's skin prickled. Why me? She whispered. The agent sighed, glancing at the papers. Because of what your father did. Or rather, what he took. Sarah's face tightened. What are you talking about? The agent flipped to another page and pointed to a section near the bottom. There was a transaction your husband was supposed to process. One that involved moving a large sum of money into an offshore account for Caldwell. He looked at Sarah, but instead of processing it, Jason Brooks intercepted it. Sarah blinked. Intercepted it. He took the money, the agent clarified, and he hid it. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Jason Brooks had stolen from Richard Caldwell. Her father, who always told her to be kind, to be honest, to do the right thing, had betrayed one of the most dangerous criminals in the country. And Caldwell had figured it out. The agent turned to Olivia. Your father was desperate to keep you safe. But Caldwell wanted to send a message. He didn't just want his money back. He wanted revenge. Olivia felt her stomach twist. She was the message. That's why the black car had been watching. That's why Caldwell had broken into the safe house. Her father had stolen from a criminal empire. And in return, Caldwell had come for his daughter. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Where's the money now? The agent shook his head. That's the problem. We don't know. Sarah's eyes widened. What do you mean you don't know? The agent flipped through the file. Before he was arrested, Jason managed to move the money somewhere off record. It's untraceable. Caldwell has been trying to find it ever since. Olivia's hands clenched into fists. Her father had risked everything. He had stolen from Caldwell. He had betrayed a criminal empire for her. But why? And where had he hidden the money? Before she could ask, the front door burst open. A second agent rushed in, breathless. We have a problem, he said quickly. The lead agent frowned. What kind of problem? The second agent hesitated, then met Olivia's gaze. Jason Brooks just escaped. 1 hour earlier. Inside the county jail, Jason Brooks sat in his cell, his fingers drumming against the metal bench. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even nervous. He had known this moment was coming. Ever since he had agreed to give the FBI information about Caldwell, Jason knew he was living on borrowed time. Caldwell had people everywhere. And now, they were coming for him. The moment the cell doors buzzed open for evening transfers, Jason moved fast. He slipped through the crowd, blending in with the others. When an officer's back was turned, he moved. Quick, calculated. By the time anyone noticed he was missing, Jason Brooks was already gone. Back at the safe house, Sarah shot up from the couch. Escaped, she repeated, her voice sharp. How? What? The lead agent's expression was grim. That's what we're trying to figure out. Olivia's heart pounded. Her dad had escaped. That meant he was out there, somewhere. But was he running from someone? Or was he running to them? The agent turned to the second officer. Put out an alert. Find him before Caldwell's people do. The officer nodded and rushed back outside. Sarah ran a hand through her hair, panic flickering in her eyes. If Jason escaped, that means Caldwell's men could be after him. The agent nodded. Exactly. Which is why we need to keep you both under heavy protection until we know what he's planning. Olivia barely heard them. Her mind was spinning. Her father was out there. And she knew, deep down, he wasn't just running. He had a plan. And whatever it was, it involved her. Later that night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She lay in the small bedroom of the safe house, staring at the ceiling, her heart heavy. Her father had done so many things wrong. But in the end, he had only wanted to protect her. And now, he was alone, on the run. She rolled over, reaching into her backpack. Her fingers brushed against the worn edges of a photograph. She pulled it out, staring at the image of her and her dad at the zoo last summer. She remembered that day so clearly. The way he had lifted her onto his shoulders so she could see the lions. The way he had bought her ice cream, even though dinner was only an hour away. The way he had laughed, carefree and full of life. Not like now. Not like the man she had seen in the courtroom. Tears pricked at her eyes. "Where are you, Daddy?" Just as she was about to close her eyes, something buzzed. Olivia froze. It was coming from her backpack. Slowly, she unzipped the pocket. The burner phone. The secure phone the agent had given her mother. It was vibrating. Olivia hesitated. It wasn't supposed to ring unless it was the FBI. She grabbed it and pressed the button. "Hello," she whispered. There was silence. Then, "Olivia." Her breath hitched. She knew that voice. It was raspy, low, familiar. "Daddy," she choked out. Silence. Then, "I don't have much time," Jason whispered. "You need to listen to me carefully." Olivia gripped the phone tighter. "Where are you?" "I can't say," he said quickly. "But I need you to trust me. I left something for you." Her stomach twisted. "What?" "A key." Olivia's pulse pounded in her ears. "A key," she repeated. "Yes." Jason's voice was urgent now. "It's hidden where you'll know to look. Find it. It will lead you to everything." "Everything what?" Olivia's voice was shaking. But before he could answer, she heard something on his end. A shout. A scuffle. Then, click. The line went dead. Olivia sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her father was gone. Again. But now, she had a mission. She had to find the key, and whatever it unlocked would change everything. The phone slipped from Olivia's trembling fingers. Her father was gone, but his last words echoed in her head. Find the key. A key to what? Her breath came fast. She sat there in the dark, the weight of his message pressing on her chest. Then, a realization hit her like a lightning bolt. It's hidden where you'll know to look. She knew where it was, and she had to get to it before anyone else did. The next morning, Sarah paced the small safe house, the phone gripped tightly in her hands. The FBI is already looking for him, she muttered, more to herself than Olivia. They'll find him before Caldwell does. They have to. Olivia sat quietly on the couch, gripping the edge of her seat. She hadn't told her mother about the phone call. Not yet. Because if she did, they wouldn't let her go after the key. And she had to find it. She took a deep breath. Mom. Sarah stopped pacing. Yes, sweetheart. Olivia hesitated. Can we go back home? Sarah's eyes widened. What? I left something important there. Olivia said quickly. Something from Dad. A picture. Sarah's face softened, but she shook her head. No, honey. We can't. It's too dangerous. Olivia's stomach sank. She needed to get home. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. That afternoon, Olivia sat on the porch of the safe house, staring out at the trees. She needed someone who could help her get back home. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. And then, she thought of him. Jake. Her best friend. He had been her neighbor since they were 5. He was the only person who could keep a secret. And if there was anyone who would help her, it was him. Her heart pounded as she pulled out the burner phone. She dialed his number. It rang once. Twice. Then, hello. His voice was groggy, like he had just woken up. Olivia clutched the phone tightly. Jake, it's me. A pause. Then, Olivia, where are you? The FBI came to your house. Your dad's all over the news. What's happening? Olivia swallowed hard. I don't have time to explain. But I need your help. Jake hesitated. What kind of help? She took a deep breath. I need to get back home. Another pause. Then, are you crazy? There are cops everywhere. That place is locked down. I have to, Olivia insisted. I need to find something. Something important. Jake exhaled. Liv, I want to help. But how am I even supposed to get to you? Olivia bit her lip. She hadn't thought that far ahead. Then, an idea. There's an old trail behind my house, she said quickly. The one we used to ride bikes on. If you can sneak through there, you can get close without being seen. Jake groaned. You owe me for this. Relief flooded through Olivia. I know. Just hurry. That night, the plan was risky. Jake would sneak to the safe house, and Olivia would slip out while her mother was asleep. Then, they'd go back home, and she'd find the key. Simple. But as Olivia waited by the back door, her heart pounded. If they got caught, she shook the thought away. She had to do this. A faint rustling outside made her snap to attention. Then, 2 quick taps on the window. Jake. Olivia cracked the door open. He slipped inside, his hoodie pulled low over his face. Liv, this is insane, he whispered. If we get caught. We won't, she whispered back. Come on. They slipped out into the night. And for the first time in weeks, Olivia felt like she was finally taking control. Back at her house, the streets were dark and quiet. Police cars were stationed near her home, but they weren't expecting a couple of kids to sneak past them. Jake and Olivia crouched low, using the bushes for cover. Her house looked different. Cold. Empty. It didn't feel like home anymore. But she wasn't here to reminisce. She was here to find the key. She turned to Jake. Keep watch. I'll be fast. Jake sighed. This is the stupidest thing we've ever done. She gave him a quick, grateful look. Then, she slipped through the back door. Her heart pounded as she crept inside. The living room, the hallway, and finally, her father's office. It felt frozen in time, like he had just been there. She swallowed hard and stepped inside, where you'll know to look. Her eyes scanned the room, and then she saw it. The bookshelf. Specifically, the one book that wasn't dusty. Her father's favorite, The Count of Monte Cristo. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it from the shelf. It was heavier than she remembered. She flipped it open, and there, wedged between the pages, was a small, silver key. She gasped. This was it. The key. But before she could process what it meant, a voice sliced through the darkness. Well. Olivia froze. That voice. It wasn't Jake's. It was low, cold, familiar. She turned slowly, and her blood ran cold. A man stood in the doorway. Not Caldwell, but someone worse. One of his men. A man with a cruel smile and dark, soulless eyes. I've been waiting for you, kid, he said, stepping forward. Olivia's heart pounded. She clutched the key in her fist. She had found it, but now, she had to escape with it. Olivia's breath hitched. The man in the doorway blocked her only exit. He was tall, dressed in black, his cold eyes fixed on her like a predator who had finally trapped his prey. He took a slow step forward. You made this real easy for me, he said, his voice smooth and unsettling. Been waiting for you to come back here. Olivia's mind raced. He knew I'd come back. He had been watching. Her grip tightened around the small silver key in her palm. She had no idea what it unlocked, but one thing was clear. This man wanted it. Which meant she couldn't let him have it. She forced herself to stay calm. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. The man chuckled. Come on, kid. I know you're smart. You wouldn't be here if you didn't know exactly what you were looking for. He stepped forward again. Olivia took a step back. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She had to think fast. If she screamed, the police outside might hear. But could she risk it? Would this man even let her? Then, a sound from outside. A click. The man stiffened. Olivia barely had time to register what happened next. Crash. The window behind him shattered. And then, Jake tackled him from behind. 2 minutes earlier, Jake was crouched behind the bushes, trying to stay calm. Olivia had been inside for too long. Too long. Something was wrong. He pulled out his phone, debating whether to text her. Then, he saw movement. Inside the house, a dark figure in the office. Not Olivia. His stomach dropped. He didn't think. He moved. Scrambling to his feet, he ran toward the side of the house. The only thing between Olivia and that man was a window. So Jake did the only thing he could. He grabbed the nearest rock and threw it with everything he had. Back in the present, glass rained down as Jake's tackle sent the man stumbling forward. Olivia didn't hesitate. She ran. She bolted past them, gripping the key so tightly it dug into her skin. Jake scrambled to his feet. Run, Liv. Olivia didn't need to be told twice. She tore through the hallway, her feet pounding against the wooden floor. Behind her, she heard the man curse, heard a struggle. But she couldn't look back. She couldn't stop. She sprinted toward the back door and slammed straight into someone. Her scream barely had time to escape before a hand clamped over her mouth. A second man. Bigger. Stronger. He grabbed her by the arms, yanking her backward. Olivia thrashed wildly, but he was too strong. She kicked. Bit. Nothing worked. She was trapped. She felt herself being dragged toward the front door. No. Then, bang. A deafening gunshot. The man froze. Olivia's ears rang. She didn't know where the shot had come from, until she saw him, standing in the doorway, breathing hard, his hands bound in cuffs. Except for one. because he had taken a gun from one of his captors. And now, he was pointing it directly at the man holding Olivia. Jason Brooks, her father. 1 hour earlier, the transport van was moving fast. Jason sat quietly in the back, his wrists shackled, 2 federal agents seated across from him. But his mind wasn't quiet. He knew what Caldwell's men were capable of, and he knew exactly where Olivia had gone. If he didn't get to her first, she was dead. The van stopped at a red light. Jason looked up. This was his only chance. Quick, calculated. He moved. A sharp lunge forward. A shoulder strike. A struggle. A gun. And just like that, Jason Brooks was free. Back in the present, Jason's chest rose and fell sharply. His gun was steady, aimed right at Olivia's captor. Let her go. His voice was steel. The man hesitated. For the first time, Olivia felt his grip loosen. Jason cocked the gun. Now, the man made a split-second decision. He shoved Olivia forward. She stumbled, gasping, falling right into her father's arms. Jason caught her, held her. His cuffs clinked together as he wrapped his arms around her, keeping her close. Are you okay? His voice was hoarse. She nodded, gripping onto him. Dad, the man lunged. Jason moved. Bang. Another gunshot. The man collapsed. Jake stumbled out of the office, panting. What the? Jason grabbed Olivia's hand. We have to go. More footsteps. Outside. Sirens. FBI. Jason turned, his jaw tight. He grabbed the gun, tossed it away, and raised his hands. Seconds later, federal agents stormed through the doors. Freeze. Jason didn't run. He didn't fight. He just looked down at Olivia. And he smiled. Then, he let them take him. 1 hour later, the police station was eerily quiet. Olivia sat in the waiting area, the key still clenched in her palm. Everything had happened so fast. The agents had taken Jason away, but before they did, he had whispered something in her ear. It unlocks everything, Liv. Trust me. She squeezed her eyes shut. Her father was back in custody. Caldwell's men were gone. But there was still one last mystery. The key. Sarah sat beside her, silent. Jake, still shaken, sat across from them. Finally, the lead agent walked in. He looked at Olivia. Are you ready to find out what your father was hiding? Olivia's fingers curled around the key. She looked up and nodded. Let's finish this. The key felt heavy in Olivia's palm. The small silver object that had led her on this terrifying journey, through courtrooms, safe houses, and into the hands of dangerous criminals, was now the only thing standing between her and the truth. The lead agent stood before her, his gaze steady. Your father gave this to you for a reason, he said. Are you ready to find out why? Olivia nodded, gripping the key tighter. Yes. Sarah, sitting beside her, exhaled shakily. Where does it go? The agent exchanged a glance with one of his officers before turning back to Olivia. We believe the key unlocks a storage unit. We found a rental agreement under your father's name, an off-the-books lease for a unit on the outskirts of the city. Olivia's heart pounded. This was it. This was what her father had risked everything for. Then let's go, she whispered. 1 hour later, the air was thick with anticipation. Olivia, Sarah, and the FBI team stood outside a row of storage units. They were old, rusted, lined up like forgotten secrets. The lead agent pointed toward one near the end. This is it. Unit 19B. The metal door was shut tight, a single lock keeping it closed. Olivia's fingers trembled as she stepped forward. This was what her father had wanted her to find. She slid the key into the lock. A deep breath. Then, she turned it. Click. The lock popped open. Jake, standing behind her, muttered, Here we go. Olivia took a step back as the agents pulled the heavy door upward. And inside was the truth. Stacks of documents. Piles of cash bundled in thick rubber bands. Hard drives neatly stored in metal cases. And sitting right in the middle, a video camera. The lead agent stepped inside first, carefully examining the contents. This is it, he murmured. This is what Caldwell was after. Sarah's voice was shaky. What is all of this? The agent picked up one of the files, flipping through the pages. These are financial records. Proof that Caldwell has been laundering money through multiple businesses. He turned the page. And these? He exhaled. These are names. High-profile names. People involved in his network. Olivia's chest tightened. Caldwell wasn't just running a financial scam. This went deep. The agent turned to one of his men. Get this back to headquarters. We have everything we need. But Olivia was staring at something else. The camera. She reached for it slowly, her fingers brushing the power button. The lead agent looked over. Olivia. But she had already pressed play. The screen flickered. And then, Jason Brooks appeared. The final message. Olivia sucked in a breath. Her father looked different. Not the polished businessman he had been in court. Not the desperate fugitive he had become. He looked tired. But his eyes were full of something she hadn't seen before. Peace. If you're watching this, Jason said, then it means I didn't make it out of this the way I hoped. Sarah clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. Jason continued. I made mistakes. Big ones. I got caught up in things I never should have. And in the end, I realized I couldn't undo what I had done. He exhaled. But I could make it right. He leaned closer. Olivia. Her breath hitched. Jason's voice softened. Sweetheart, I know this must have been terrifying for you. And I'm so sorry for that. But I had to make sure you were safe. Because you were the most important thing in my life. Tears slipped down Olivia's cheeks. I took money from Caldwell. Yes, Jason admitted. But it wasn't just about stealing from him. It was about stopping him. I gathered everything. Names, documents, proof. I hid it all here, so that if anything happened to me, you would still be protected. His face hardened. But Caldwell wouldn't stop. I knew that. So I had to make sure the world knew the truth. Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't expect forgiveness. And I don't expect you to understand everything I did. But I need you to know this. He looked directly at the camera. I did it for you. The screen went black. The aftermath. The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia stared at the screen, her heart hammering. Her father wasn't perfect. He had made mistakes. But in the end, he had done the right thing. Sarah wiped her eyes, pulling Olivia into a hug. He loved you so much, she whispered. The lead agent exhaled. This changes everything. Caldwell's entire operation, his network, it's all here. With this, we can take down every single person involved. Jake muttered. Well, that was intense. Olivia let out a breathy laugh. For the first time in weeks, she felt light, like the weight of all the secrets, all the lies, had finally lifted. Sarah squeezed her hand. Are we safe now? The agent nodded. Yes. He glanced at Olivia. And your father made sure of that. Olivia wiped her eyes. It was over. Caldwell was behind bars. The truth was out. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe. 1 month later, the house was different now. The bullet holes were gone. The furniture had been replaced. But it still didn't feel the same. Because he wasn't there. Olivia sat on the porch, staring at the sky. Jake flopped down beside her. So he said, what now? Olivia thought for a moment. Then, she smiled. We live. Jake snorted. That's deep. She rolled her eyes. Shut up. Then, a car pulled up. An FBI vehicle. The lead agent stepped out, holding a small envelope. Sarah walked outside, her expression unreadable. The agent smiled gently and handed Olivia the envelope. It's from him, he said. Her breath caught. She opened it slowly, her fingers shaking. Inside, a letter. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words. Olivia, if you're reading this, it means you're safe. And that means I did something right. I know things will never be the same. But I hope that one day, you'll understand why I did what I did. You are the best thing I ever did. And no matter what, I will always love you. Be brave, be kind, and never stop fighting for the truth. Love, Dad. Tears welled in her eyes. She clutched the letter to her chest, exhaling shakily. Jake nudged her. You okay? Olivia blinked up at the sky. For the first time in a long time, she truly felt like she would be. She smiled. Yeah. And for the first time, she meant it.